Excellent. All right, welcome back, everyone. So, on behalf of the Harry Bridges Center for Labor Studies and the Labor Solidarity Project at the University of Washington-Tacoma, I'd like to welcome everyone back to this installment of our fall seminar series, Labor Strikes Back. And we've got an outstanding event tonight that explores workplace radicalism in an industry that's traditionally been defined by contradictions and misconceptions. Our guest tonight is an academic, an activist, an organizer, an expert with an understanding of labor that can really only come from direct involvement in the fight for economic justice. She's an author, a filmmaker, a union leader, and like me, an English PhD. Always nice to see English people getting involved with labor. However, before she was any of these things, she was a graduate student in San Francisco and a dancer at the Lusty Lady Theater, where she and her fellow employees organized the first strippers union in the world and formed a workers' cooperative. This dramatic and inspiring tale of workplace empowerment is told in Neon Girls, A Stripper's Education and Protest and Power. And this is a memoir that, first of all, I can't recommend it enough. It takes us inside the Lusty Lady during the employees' fight to unionize. It introduces us to a community of workers who really push back against many of the misconceptions that I think have long framed the popular understanding of this industry and the folks who work in it. And I think it ultimately celebrates the empowerment, the agency, the solidarity, the resistance, that emerges when workers come together to demand the dignity that all labor deserves. It's an amazing history. It's an amazing story. And our guest tonight possesses that kind of rare expertise that can only come from having lived it. So please join me tonight in welcoming Dr. Jennifer Worley to the seminar series.
Thank you so much, Alex.
Oh, I've got more intro here too.
Oh my gosh, okay.
So Dr. Worley is a professor of English at City College of San Francisco and the president of the faculty union, which is AFT 2121. Outstanding. Let's get a round of applause for that. So in addition to authoring Neon Girls, she's the director of the film Sex on Wheels, which documents the history of San Francisco's sex industry and sex worker activism. Her writings appeared in Bitch, Captive Genders, Invisible Suburbs, The Queerest, and PRI's Outright Radio. So thank you again, Jennifer, for joining us. I'm just really excited to share this work. I was first turned on to this through Kim Kelly's Fight Like Hell. And as soon as I saw the reference, I was like, I need to buy that book immediately. I so appreciate, and people who are here, who've been here all seminar, know that, I love folks who kind of possess that expertise that comes from like an academic understanding of something, but having like lived the actual history. And so I think what we'll do tonight is stick to what's become kind of our standard format with a presentation followed by some Q&A. We had some great questions submitted ahead of time, so don't be surprised if I back channel you in the chat and see whether or not you actually want to ask a question. But feel free to add questions to the chat as they arise. So with all of that said, I'm going to pass the microphone over to our guest tonight, Dr. Jennifer Worley.
Thank you so much, Alex. Thanks everyone for coming. This is so exciting, and I love having I love that folks from the community just come to this. It's exciting to have folks from outside the classroom, but also the students as well. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to read from my book, Neon Girls. And while Alex was speaking, I put a little link to how you can buy it from the publisher, HarperCollins. So I'm going to read from Neon Girls, but first I'm going to give you a little bit of background that sets up the passage that I'm going to read. And then after the reading will be about 20 minutes. And then, sorry, my dog is clamoring to get in the room with me now that he hears me talking. There's Shadow. Okay. Okay. So I'll give you a little bit of an intro to where we are, where I pick up in the book. And some of you I know have probably read the chapter that I am going to read from is called Under Nude Management. And the reason I chose this chapter is because it goes a little bit beyond the union organizing. And I thought for this particular seminar, where people are already pretty familiar with that story, it might be interesting to delve into the politics and the challenges of worker-owned cooperatives. So creating and operating a worker-owned business or worker-owned collective. So Neon Girls is a memoir, and it's the story of, it begins with me as a graduate student in my 20s in San Francisco. Trying to survive in what at the time seemed very expensive San Francisco, which compared to now is not so much. But it's me trying to survive in San Francisco and trying to get my master's degree in English at San Francisco State, and working at a publishing company and just trying to scrape the rent together, and realizing that I could make more money working at a local peep show, which was called the Lusty Lady Theater. And so I go and audition and get a job at this peep show. The economics of working there are interesting, and just to give a little bit of introduction to that, we actually, people typically think of stripping or nude dancing as involving tips. You mostly live off of your tips, and you kind of hustle the customers. At the Lusty Lady, we actually punched a time clock, and we made an hourly wage, and we didn't really make tips for the most part. So it was different in that way. And that was actually, I think, a big part of what allowed us to really organize. And the reason for that is that at other strip clubs, the dancers would be in competition with one another. So it was much more difficult to create that solidarity that you need for successful organizing drive. At the Lusty, we were punching a time clock, and it was much easier to connect with each other and to build that solidarity that we needed to get us through the organizing process. So the passage where I'm going to read a passage that's from near the end of the book. And we have, at this point, like, I've become a dancer. It sort of starts with this ingenue position, like, whoa, what is this weird world of nude dancing in a peep show? And I've learned the ropes a little bit and gotten comfortable with the work and made connections and friendships with the other dancers. And then we've started to discover some real problems in our workplace. The Lusty Lady in the 90s really was seen as this almost feminist version of the sex industry, where it was woman-owned, and we actually had a sexual harassment policy, and there was just a lot of kind of feminism in the water at the Lusty Lady. We saw another side of the theater when we discovered that we were being videotaped surreptitiously by our customers. And this in a time before everyone was videotaped at all moments of their lives. But we were being non-consensually videotaped by our customers from behind one-way glass at the theater. So some of the booths in this peep show where the men would watch us, some of those booths had one-way glass, so they could see us and we couldn't see them. Some of the men started taking advantage of that to actually make really explicit videos of us, and in some cases sell them on the internet. So that was a worry. We asked the bosses to take them out. The bosses refused, and that became our organizing issue. So in labor organizing, when you want to form a union, you need to always have an organizing issue. And an organizing issue is something that the majority of workers are going to be upset about, are going to be impacted negatively by, and that will mobilize them to vote yes and to support unionization. The for us, the one-way windows were our organizing issue. There was also very rampant racial discrimination at the Lusty Lady. And, that was also an issue, but because the discrimination was so prevalent, there were very few women of color, particularly very few African-American women who were the most impacted by that issue, right? So even though it was deeply felt by those people and it deeply impacted them negatively, it wasn't as widely felt because the rest of us were not harmed by it. And in fact, were privileged by the racial dynamic. So, but that was another issue that we used to organize around. So at this point in the story where I'm going to pick up, we've already created our union. We've gotten our first contract, and we are negotiating. It's years down the road. It's 2003. We negotiated our first contract in 1997. So it's 2003. So it's like 6 years into having this established union, which is one of the first in this industry. And the theater is not doing well. There's competition from the internet, and so the company, the business is not making the kind of money that they used to be making. We are in negotiations for our contract, and we come into the negotiations meeting with our boss one day. He walks in and hands us a list of our demands, essentially, and a contract, a version of the contract, a tentative agreement that says that he agrees to everything that we're asking for. So essentially he says, okay, I read your demands for pay, for time, for fairness, for this policy, that policy, health insurance. I'm signing off on all of that, and I agree with you. And this is here's the tentative agreement. And everyone, of course, our team was like, oh my God, yay. It's a union organizing miracle, or it's a contract negotiation miracle. That does not happen. Where the boss comes in on the first day and just agrees with everything you ask for. No. The next day we went into work and we all got pink slipped, and he announced that he was closing the theater and we would all be laid off. I think at the end of that month. So it was, conceding to all of our demands was essentially he just wanted to get on a plane and get out of there. So in response to this, we decided, okay, if they don't want this company, we can take over this company. We're gonna take it over and we're gonna run it as a collective, and that's what we did. So where I'm going to pick up, we've done that. We've done a fundraiser. We started the business. We're starting our first year as worker owners of this business. And we have elected a board of directors who are, it's dancers and support staff janitors. So there's, I think, 7 of us on the board of directors who are mostly former union shop stewards who got this idea, like, hey, let's take it over and run it ourselves. So we have a board of directors. We have stage directors who are also elected. So all of our bosses were elected by the workers to create the schedule, to hire and fire, etc. So it's completely democratically run, the business. Okay. So here we are. It's Monday, May 12th, 2003 at 9 a.m., just 7 weeks since I'd taped up my manifesto to the makeup mirror. So when the boss pink slipped us all, I wrote a manifesto and said, we got to take this over and let's do it. We can do it. And put it up on the makeup mirror, and things followed from there. Dancers and support staff took ownership of the Lusty Lady Theater. We'd sent out press releases, and a group of us posed for dozens of news cameras, cutting the giant lacy garter fastened across the front doors of the theater for the occasion. Under Nude management, read a big banner we'd strung over the entrance. For the most part, our workdays remain the same. Long hours on stage, running through the positions of the lusty ballet. Afternoons and evenings spent luring men into the private pleasures booth and emptying their wallets. Rushed minutes applying makeup to the tune of pornographic moans from the video booths. Post-work lingering, comparing notes, and telling tales in the dressing room. But now we also had to do everything management used to do. Tony and Havana, that's one of the support staff and one of the dancers, collected, counted, and deposited in our company bank account the coins and bills from the various video and live show booths. The support staff lead team scheduled cashiers and janitors. Penny and Gabrielle made the performer's schedule each week, ran payroll, and evaluated dancers' performances. The board of directors met weekly and submitted our outrageous monthly rent, kept the theater's insurance up to date, and paid our payroll taxes. For a while, everything went smoothly. Okay, next item. Penny and Gabrielle are here to address some issues about the live show. Penny, you're on, I said. It was September 2003, the beginning of our second quarter as business owners, and we were holding a board of directors meeting at Vesuvio, a warmly lit, lushly decorated beatnik bar around the corner from the Lusty. Penny and Gabrielle elected as the dancers' lead team for 6-month terms to hire, schedule, and evaluate their fellow dancers, had requested time to confer with the board about the stage show. Penny cleared her throat. Okay, so here's the deal. As some of you have noticed, dancers are starting to slack off on stage, and the live show revenues have really dropped recently. We've given warnings to the dancers in question, and they basically told us to fuck off. Gabrielle added, Shane said that since we all own the place, I didn't have the right to tell her what to do. Penny continued, so first off, we're going to give Shane a warning, and we'd like to have your support in case she doesn't shape up and we need to fire her. But we also think it would be good to talk about how we can create a workplace culture that makes us more accountable to one another. Ruby piped up. Let's use shunning, like the Amish. Sapphire thinks we should use consensus-building processes for all decisions, including hiring and firing, Pepper said. Sapphire thinks she's the reincarnation of an Egyptian goddess, Ruby pointed out. Good point, Pepper sighed. Before our unionization and cooperatization, the Lusty had been ruled by a petty despotism, under which clocking in a minute late might warrant a $10 an hour pay cut. We had fought against these draconian practices, but we'd never successfully replaced the old system with a new one that balanced workers' rights with the need for strong performances. After we became a co-op, this problem worsened. Dancers would carry on long conversations on stage, a practice that can work in a lot of manual jobs. But in a peep show, while performing, a big part of our job is pretending to be into the job. You can't create the illusion that you're seducing a customer while simultaneously carrying on a conversation with your coworker about gym shoes. As a worker-owned business, we struggled to create policies and practices that reflected our responsibility for each other's livelihood, on the one hand, but also the fear, precarity, and sometimes arbitrary punishment that had governed us under a traditional management structure. This was the most difficult challenge in the transition to collective ownership. For we are, all of us, profoundly socialized into capitalism, which teaches us to prize the self alone and to see collective interest as a sucker's bet. In practice, at the peep show, that looked like this. Shane liked to smoke weed before work and nap on stage. Even though she was now a part owner with a tangible investment in making the club more profitable, Shane did a different sort of math. Because she could count on the rest of us to do enough booty shaking to get her paid, she figured she could both nap and get paid on a decent wage. In a sense, she was right. In labor, this is called free riding, which is different from freeloading. It's less pejorative, but it means like, okay, others are going to sort of do the hard part for me. So in a sense, she was right. With no clear and immediate consequence for their actions and no sense of responsibility to the group, some could have their cake and eat it too. Smoking up and napping, yet still collecting a check. For the rest of us, it felt uncomfortable to intervene and tell a coworker to shape up because, also socialized into the hierarchies of capitalism, we expected the boss to do that. Without a boss, it just felt bossy to intervene. But we knew we had to do something. I'm serious about the shunning, Ruby insisted. That shit works. We ultimately decided to address the slacking off problem by amending our pay structure so that our weekly wages were tied directly to the theater's income that week. This was scary at first, but it addressed both our cash flow problems and the slacking off on stage issue. Once workers saw their wages go up and down with revenue, it became easier to hold one another accountable to a decent standard of performance on stage. Since our mutual dependence on one another was spelled out in dollars in our paychecks. We also took our hourly pay rate down to minimum wage and paid the amount above that as what's called patronage, a legal term for profits paid to owners of a worker-owned co-op. Most co-ops pay patronage annually, like dividends on stocks, but since our workers were operating on a very thin margin, we decided to pay it weekly. Patronage funds were not subject to payroll taxes, things like unemployment and workers' comp. And as a result, the collective was able to pass on to our member workers the money that would have gone to those taxes. When I'd posted that flyer in the middle of the dressing room mirror, urging a worker takeover, a moment that Pepper now referred to as when Delinqua nailed her theses to the church door. My stage name was Delinqua. When Delinqua nailed her theses to the church door, I'd felt a necessary confidence that we could pull this off. But that confidence had been built upon a felicitous foundation of ignorance about what running a business would entail. Had I known about the multiple insurance policies, the business licenses, the payroll taxes, the $12,000 rent, that's 25 years ago, the difficulty in shifting our collective subjectivity from that of employees to that of worker owners, I might never have written my manifesto and would certainly not have led my comrades to the barricades with such self-assurance. Now I felt responsible for having brought some 70 other humans along on my charge. Each night I spent hours on the phone with Pepper, sorting through some new impending disaster, both of us confessing our doubts and lack of answers. But at the theater, I never allowed myself to show doubt. I maintained a clear, unwavering stance. We were the women who had founded a sex workers union, created a strippers co-op, and bought our own business, and we were going to run it successfully. In addition to feeling responsible to my coworkers, I also felt a more public accountability. I felt responsible for continuing the legacy of sex worker organizers who had come before us. The unionized burlesque dancers of the 1930s, the striking French prostitutes of the 1970s, the passionate, humorous advocates who formed Coyote, Call Off Your Old Tired Ethics, the militant strippers of Exotic Dancers Union who'd urged us to action. I wanted to be worthy of the groundwork they'd laid to carry on their work and to make them proud, even if posthumously so. Even more, I felt the eyes of all the dancers and other sex workers who saw the Lusty Lady as an example of success. both our unionization and our worker takeover had made news around the world. Dancers in other cities, states, and countries regularly contacted us for organizing advice. The sense that the others were watching gave weight to our efforts, and I felt obliged to set a hopeful example for other dancers, other workers, other women. In February 2004, we realized that our union contract, the one whose signing had precipitated the club's almost closure and our worker takeover, was about to expire in March. So we're like a year into the process of creating our worker co-op here. Our unusual status as both a union and a worker co-op meant that we were all both labor and management, which meant that when it came time to renegotiate our contract, we were effectively negotiating with ourselves. In a typical negotiation, labor and management have separate conflicting interests, with labor seeking to maximize wages, benefits, and working conditions, and management seeking to minimize those in order to maximize profit. With the same people in both seats, negotiating seemed pointless. Both wages and profits accrued to us, the workers, so there were no conflicting interests. What we might gain as workers by fighting for higher wages, we would lose in profits as owners, so it was a zero-sum game. We discussed the possibility of decertifying, taking a vote to dissolve our union so that we could simply make collective decisions about pay, benefits, shifts, and other issues without the legal process of negotiating a contract with ourselves. In a practical sense, we no longer needed or benefited from the collective bargaining process, since we were bargaining with ourselves. But it was just a formality at this point. As the only remaining member of the original union organizing committee, I balked at the idea of decertifying, even though it made a certain practical sense. As a refuge from the union busting of the now closed Regal Peep Show, as a refugee from the union busting of the now closed Regal Peep Show, a veteran Lusty Lady shop steward since the early days of Exotic Dancers Union, Pepper, too, was adamant in opposing decertification. She pointed out that we were still the only unionized strippers in the world, and it was symbolically important to uphold that status. Many would read our decertification as an anti-labor gesture or a lesson to other dancers not to bother. The other reason we decided to stay unionized was that it protected us in a different way. Our finances were tenuous. We still owed 4 years' worth of payments to our former owner, and there was a chance we might need to change the terms of our buyout agreement. With the unionized workforce, the Lusty Lady was virtually unsellable. Sex industry investors were accustomed to making huge sums by exploiting their workers, and they balked at the idea of negotiating with workers they thought of as whores. That gave our boss, or our former boss, an incentive to work with us, because doing so was more profitable than either selling a club that was settled with the union or shutting it down. So we decided to remain unionized for both the symbolic value and the practical protection it provided against a hostile takeover. So in other words, our former boss financed us and we bought it out. We bought the club over 5 years. We were making regular payments. But we worried like, oh, what if we need to, you renegotiate with him? What if we can't, make the payments or something? We don't want him to be able to say, oh, well, I'm taking it back, right, and selling it to someone else. In earlier years, as union organizers, we'd learned to tap into our collective anger and direct that anger at our boss. So it felt foreign and even scary suddenly to have no boss. Sure, it was liberating to run the club our way, but worker ownership also meant that when things got difficult or felt unfair, we had no boss at whom to direct our ire. This was a hard shift for me to make. So I understood when, even after we'd seized collective control of the club, some remained stuck in the worker versus boss model. Two dancers in particular, Luna and Lucretia, had a very hard time now that they had a say in how things were run. They didn't agree that now that they had a say, they also had a responsibility to help create the workplace that they wanted. Both had been at the Lusty for many years. Lucretia had been a union shop steward, Luna a member of our final contract bargaining team. Accustomed to the adversarial approach that had previously served us so well, they clung to that approach, even when it meant seeing their own comrades as adversaries. A journalist from the New Yorker who did a story on our co-op compared the dynamics to those of the Russian Revolution. But for me, the friction harkened back to a phenomenon that 1960s and 70s women's liberationists called trashing. As the second wave radical feminist movement developed, newer participants began to resent those who'd forged it and to lash out against its leaders. We now faced a similar dynamic. These two dancers, who had hated management and had been strong union supporters, suddenly turned their ire on those of us who'd overthrown management and seized power for the workers. In Luna and Lucretia's eyes, we were no longer comrades, struggling to create a democratic workplace that operated for the benefit of the workers. We were now their oppressors, and they opposed us at every opportunity. When we were forming the co-op and pooling our money to cover startup costs, they protested that they didn't have money to contribute. When we responded with an idea to host a fundraising event that allowed any dancer to buy into the co-op with 8 hours work instead of cash, Luna and Lucretia insisted on being paid their hourly wage for the work instead. We wanted to mandate that all workers be co-op members and thus equal owners of the business so that everyone would benefit equally from our success and no one was in a position to profit off her coworkers. Luna and Lucretia protested that we couldn't force them to join if they didn't want to. Thus, they insisted on maintaining the comfortable us-them dynamic of the older order, railing against the rest of us, especially the elected board, as oppressors. I'm going to stop there for now. Yeah, but so I guess move on to discussion. And I know some of you had prepped questions ahead of time. I'm just looking at the chat now. Oh, welcome, Jenny. Thank you, Holly. Best chapter title ever. Yes.
I was going to say, before we even go to questions, can we get a round of applause for the reading? That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think this, again, this book, it's just such a fascinating story. The idea of organizing sex workers, it feels niche, but the way you tell it, it's an industry like any other industry, and we kind of run into the same challenges. There are industry specific challenges, but I think that idea of imagining a system beyond capitalism, right? It's really challenging, right? Because we just, like you say, we're so socialized or acculturated to kind of just sort of exist in those structures. It's like there's no blueprint or there's no kind of roadmap once those are pulled away. And I think that the book, it's a real roller coaster. Right? I don't want to spoil it for people who are going to read it, but it's, when I finished it, I was pretty teary eyed because I think you're right. When all of a sudden we become the boss and we're kind of we feel bossy, right? I think that the realization that being kind of simultaneously an employee and the boss is really tough. There's a competing skill set there. And you do a really great job kind of talking about just that burden of responsibility, especially as kind of one of the leaders who, instigated this process. you
Yeah.
know.
It was particularly that shift, I think, was really potent in among the workers at the Lusty, because we were like a bunch of gutter punks. We weren't fancy like strippers with boob jobs and fake tans and making $1,000 a night. We were like punk rockers and anarchists and all of that. So that shift to, and even like the idea of like telling your coworker like, hey, can you not smoke weed and take a nap on while we're working? Like that was like, whoa. That just felt very out of line in the culture that we had there. Yeah, and I really wanted to explore that kind of, I guess, the socialization that we are as subjects, as our subjectivity is the subjectivity of capitalism, and we're all shaped within that, and it's a real struggle to move beyond that.
Yeah, it's very Foucault, right? This sort of the kind of discipline that we've all received to almost like need a boss.
Yeah.
If only, I think, in that the last example you provided, just to have somebody to sort of direct our resentment toward, right? Like, and when we were simultaneously the employee and the boss, it's like, where do we point our finger if not at ourselves?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I did see in the chat, somebody had a question about just the writing of the book being very creative, looking for advice that you would give to somebody who wants to get into creative nonfiction.
Yeah. Good question. Yeah, this is actually my first book. I wrote it. I've done scholarly writing, academic type of writing before, but this is really, I've just delved into it with this book, and it's so funny. I think I started writing the book with just a writing prompt, like one of those writing prompts you get off the internet, where it's like, describe a person that you remember, or something like that. And I just started writing these little character descriptions of all the women I remembered, and this is, at the time, it was probably more than 10 years on from being at the Lusty, but of all these women from the Lusty Lady who were just really interesting and incredible women. So I guess my first piece would be to write every day. And that's something I don't do myself. And so it's very hypocritical for me to say it, but to write every day. And to get a group, if you can, like a writing group of other people that you can read to, share your work with, get feedback from. And yeah, I guess those are the places I would start, is writing every day and having a group. For some people, the group is like an accountability thing, but for others, it's just helpful to get the feedback from other people. And it also, for me, writing is really hard when it feels in a vacuum. It's one of the reasons I don't really do academic writing anymore. It just feels like I'm writing it for this tiny audience of 3. But if you don't know what to write, you get one of those, or you don't even need a book. You can just go online and look up, Google like writing prompts, and you grab one that interests you and go with it. So I think that's the advice I guess I would use. Yeah.
Excellent. And consider taking a creative nonfiction class at University of Washington, Tacoma.
Oh, there you go. Yes.
I'll throw in a plug for that too.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, because a class is like having that group, because you might not have other friends who are writers, but if you have a class, it really gives you that structure, and you have an assignment that you have to do. The one other thing I would say is to be my process, to shut up your internal editor and your internal critic. My process for writing Neon Girls was so weird. I was like, I'm going to write a book about my work at the Lusty Lady, and I'm going to tell that story. And I made a rule for myself that my job right now is not to write a good story, not to write a coherent story. My job is to make words. I'm going to make fucking words every day. And the first day I was like, okay, I'm going to make 200 words today. And that, it's like a page, not even. And then each day I would increase the goal based on what I had done the day before. And I think I was just trying to encourage myself, like, oh, you met your goal. So I would make really easy little goals. But I really forced myself, like, okay, you're going to finish this draft before you have any right to criticize it or decide this part is bad or any of that stuff. So whatever you can do to shut down your internal critic during the creative process, to me, that was really helpful. It made for a lot of revisions later, but it really allowed me to create something that really felt like a book. It was like 90,000 words by the time I had a draft, and I felt like, okay, that's a book. Now let's decide whether it's a good book.
That's really good advice. I'm surprised to hear that there was a 10-year gap between, the events and the actual writing of it. I mean, it just feels like, were you interviewing your old coworkers, or?
I didn't interview them, but I had, I have a weirdly freakish memory for specific things, so that helped. I kept a journal at the time, and I'm in touch with them. Like, we're all, or most of us are still friends, in touch, and we would meet and just tell stories. So a lot of the little anecdotes are the stories from those, drunken dinners or drunken brunches, or later sober ones, when that became a thing. But yeah, so memory journal, and then this almost like an oral tradition that we would meet and tell those stories over and over.
Excellent. We've got a student I've back channeled with who wanted to pose a question.
Yeah, please.
Hi. I basically just had a question about the book. I only read the chapter that we were given, but I am going to order this book because it was really, really great. But so throughout chapter 8 and perhaps other sections of your book, you mentioned the capitalism issues that still managed to seep its way into your unionized co-op structure at the Lusty Lady.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you could perhaps explain how capitalism is directly linked to patriarchy or gender inequality, discrimination, or like other issues within this industry and market.
Wow, that's a good and complicated question. Well, within the industry, I mean, I think it's very clear that, the sex industry is the commodification of women's sexuality, or, not all women, but I mean, I'm not all the workers are women, but it's, it's the commodification for the most part of sexuality, and the bulk of the sex industry is directed towards heterosexual men. So that was also something that was a struggle for us, because we were very feminist in our take, and so we would have liked to, after the takeover, to just jettison everything that we thought was sexist or degrading, or that we thought was not feminist. But I mean, the truth is that industry, that's what they're selling. They're selling sex, but they're also selling sexism. And so thank you, Holly, for reprinting or recopying the order information. So yeah, that it really is about selling women's, bodies or images of women's bodies, and of selling often a very subordinate version of being a woman, being female. And I talk at the end of this chapter, for those of you who did read the whole chapter, I do talk about my final experience at the Lusty of a customer, it was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back for me. Just this customer kind of behaving very imperiously towards me and having a bit of a emotional breakdown while I was working in a private booth, that really let me know it was time to move on. But that was me coming face to face with the ugly side of the sex industry and really confronting the ways in which patriarchy and misogyny are, I never was able to unweave those threads. The Lusty Lady story is, in a lot of ways, it's an empowerment story, and it is about our empowerment as workers and particularly as female workers. But I always struggled. I never I don't see sex work as inherently empowering, and I don't see that as an uncomplicated issue. I don't even know if I answered your question, but that's how that's where I am after all these years.
Yeah, and the book sort of dwells in that ambiguity really well. I mean, it just feels so sort of visceral. I think, having read the whole book, I'm at a bit of an advantage. But like the way you kind of describe your earliest experiences as kind of like this sort of like journey through the looking glass, where a lot of social dynamics you would see outside of the club are kind of turned on their head.
Right.
And I mean, even the physical, like, built environment of the club, it seems sort of like a panopticon, right? It's sort of this circular area and everybody's looking, which seems to be like, at least initially, it's like, man, this seems about like as objectifying as it can get. But can you talk a little bit about like that kind of empowerment that existed in that space?
Yeah, that's something that I address early in the book. About going into the Lusty Lady, working there. So now I do wish I had brought a PowerPoint with photos, but the Lusty Lady was a panopticon, and if you don't know what a panopticon is, it's a prison. It's an organization. It's an architecture of a prison. It was initially meant for a prison. It was initially designed for a prison, in which the guard tower is in the center, and all the prisoners are in a circle around. So the guard has constant view of of all the prisoners, or could have a constant view, and but the prisoners never know, though, when the guard is watching them. It's also, I mean, it was a real thing that lots of institutions were then designed that way, lots of buildings, but it's also a metaphor for the human subjectivity and human consciousness, the being watched. So the Lusty Lady was a panopticon, and in fact, our boss could watch us from the one-way windows as well. That was the other thing, is we never knew when our boss was watching, which was the most panoptical element of it. It was most disciplinary element. This is we're talking about Michel Foucault's Discipline and Punish, but so we were constantly being watched. And going into this business, I was a young feminist, and I was like, I don't know about this world, and it's going to be pretty sexist and exploitative. And I didn't worry so much about myself, but I felt ethically compromised. Like, am I helping to reproduce the misogyny and sexism that will harm women in general, other women, as well as myself. So that's where I was when I started working in the business. But then almost as soon as I got there, working my first shifts, the women that I met, first of all, I was on stage with these other women who just really like controlled the customers, and they would like make fun of them. They would kick them out. They would like block their windows if the customers didn't do what they said, like, oh, you have to close your door, or you have to stop chewing gum, or whatever it was. And if the guys didn't obey, essentially, the women would put their back against the window so he couldn't see the naked ladies anymore. And that pretty much got the behavior that they wanted. So I immediately encountered these very confident women who really were in control, and just experienced them in ways that complicated, my initial view of the sex industry, and that remains complicated to this day. So, and I think it's also partly why I was really interested in approaching sex work as a labor issue, because regardless of the feminist reading you have of that industry, the labor conditions did need addressing, and that was, I guess, that was something that I felt very unambiguous about, was my solidarity with my coworkers.
Well, and I think too, because of the stigma connected to sex work, solidarity outside the industry from people who, our fellow workers, our fellow feminists, is often in really short supply.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was like, that was less so in San Francisco, but I still never talked about my work to any male professors, actually, to any straight male professors. I never talked about the fact that I was a dancer, even in San Francisco and even in progressive academia. It just felt too potentially like a booby trap, I guess. Someone had a question to go back to the writing. I think her name was Judy. Said, "Did you at least correct the spelling errors?" Yeah, Judy. Did you at least correct the spelling errors and other errors? Yeah, I did. I mean, that's the way I started writing it, but then there was major revisions where I had to rewrite passages or reorganize, etc. And then, of course, yes, I had multiple levels of copy editing and proofreading and so forth, professional. So both myself and professionally. But yeah, there was certainly a ton of revision. I didn't mean to imply that you just make a book by typing in words and then never revisiting them. That was just my way of getting rid of my own, kind of getting my foot off my own neck, like, oh, this isn't good enough or whatever. It was very freeing for me, and it allowed me to have something, on the page, to have something that felt done, even though I had to spend a lot of time revising.
Nice. And I see we've got somebody else on the chat board looking for a spoiler. Did the Lusty Lady close? How does the story end? Or do we have to buy the book? This is just a big commercial for the book. I want to add to that too, because I actually don't know the answer to this question. The Lusty Lady, I mean, it was technically a franchise, right? And there was a Seattle location. So I'd be curious to know, I don't know if that's still in an operation or.
So the answer to the question is yes, the Lusty Lady did close, and the answer to Alex's question, yes, there was a Seattle Lusty Lady, which was the original one, started in the 70s, and then the San Francisco one was started in the 80s, so our boss closed just the San Francisco, or tried to close just the San Francisco one, but we took it over. The Seattle Lusty Lady persisted under a traditional management structure. So it was not unionized, and it was not cooperativized. It was not worker owned. And I'm proud to say that the San Francisco collectively owned and unionized Lusty Lady outlasted the San Francisco Lusty Lady by, I think, 5 years. So the San Francisco Lusty Lady closed in 2013, and I believe the Seattle one closed in maybe 2008. I may have the date wrong on that. So yes, they sadly both did close. And I would say that really the internet was it really changed the sex industry, or that sector of the sex industry, in complicated ways that I do talk about at the end of the book, in the second half of the book, I talk about how internet porn, webcamming, all of that stuff radically changed the sex industry in ways that made a kind of old-fashioned peep show obsolete.
Excellent. I mean, and as I think your book talks really eloquently about just kind of the changes to San Francisco and kind of the role that that's my dog in the background now. The role that technology played not just in sort of changing the porn industry, but also kind of changing the like the social fabric of a city like San Francisco, and of course a city like Seattle, which is probably right there in terms of just aggressive and shameless gentrification. And
so that was really painful to watch the culture of tech, both the culture of tech swallow the city that I loved, San Francisco, but then also destroy my workplace, or this I was gone by the time it closed. I was gone 10 years before it closed, but something that I had put a lot of my work and love and youth into, to see that industry, the tech world, kind of come at me in both directions. Oh, and I simultaneously got divorced from a techie while I was writing the book. All right. So there was another good sounds like you ended up with a double workload. Did your union have a compensation structure for your extra work? Yeah, we did compensate the board, like the elected board members, the elected, the stage managers and so forth. Those jobs, we did compensate them. It was never enough. It was really a labor of love in that sense. It was never enough to really pay us for the time we'd put in, as is often the case in social justice movements.
Excellent. We have another member of the audience who is ready to ask a question.
Oh, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. So you mentioned in the reading how the Lusty Lady unionizing kind of caused a push in other places that are also sex industry to organize and unionize.
Yeah.
Like, reach out to you. I feel like that shows like a cool power that one place can have.
Yeah.
That you wouldn't expect to really unionize in a sense, and how that kind of created a wave for similar jobs to do the same. Yeah. And I was wondering if you thought that the experience of unionizing a job in an industry where people wouldn't expect to be unionized, would that experience be similar to the unionizing of a sex work industry?
Yeah, I think so. And there's a lot of that. I mean, speaking of the tech industry, that's an industry that is crying out for organizing. And yeah, I think right around when we were organizing in San Francisco, the bicycle messengers were organized as well. And some other dancers did try to form unions, not successfully. They were really kind of beaten down by the management. But I do have to say that there's a club in LA that I'm loosely in touch with them, but they're called, I can't remember their name right now, but does anyone else know what I'm talking about? The club that just unionized in Los Angeles. And amazingly, one of the women who kind of got that started was a former coworker of mine from my Lusty days. So she's still dancing, amazingly. But she kind of got the ball rolling down in Southern California. And now there's at least one successful strippers union. And we organized with SEIU. I saw that was another question, but yeah, we organized with SEIU, Service Employees International Union, just because they were the ones who were there trying to get it started and support us. But these, the women down in LA have organized with the the film industry. What's it called? Actors Equity. I think that's what it is. The equity, which is for performers, right? Which I think is great. It's because that union has like structures for dealing with independent contractors and temporary work and performance and all that stuff. So anyway, so yes, there are still people who are taking inspiration, and they, in fact, I wasn't able to go, but they had their victory party a couple of weeks ago, and they invited me to come. But some of the other Lusty Lady organizers did go to celebrate with them.
Nice. That's you've got a legacy. That's amazing.
It's very cool. Yeah. And in fact, I mean, one of their, I actually met with them early on. They had a group that was, I wish that they had kept this name, but their initial group was called Soldiers of the Pole, which just is brilliant. And I met with them to just walk them through the organizing process and the contract negotiation process and just answer their questions. And then another one meanwhile, down in LA, their key organizer is a former Lusty. And then another former Lusty organizer is now a pretty prominent labor lawyer. She's a partner in a labor law firm, and she was giving them their legal consult. So it was actually a really cool little project for us to put our new superpowers together.
That's outstanding. We've got another attendee who has a question.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I just want to say I'm really excited to even be attending this seminar. As Alex knows, sex work is something that's very near and dear to my heart. I've been in the industry for almost 7 years now, so every year for any academic writing, I've been trying to educate people about sex work.
Yeah.
So doing this seminar and learning about the connection of labor and sex work is very important to me. So I had a question. I wrote in the chat if you'd like to see it, but it basically just asked if you have any advice for online sex workers who are looking to organize after legislations like FOSTA and SESTA were put in place and essentially pushed us to go into more dangerous work and environments and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and the kind of game changer. Well, first of all, the advice. Try if you can get in touch with the union that just organized in LA. And I wish I can help you get contact information with them, but basically connect with other women who've been through it in the industry. So I think that the folks down in LA are probably the place to do that right now because they're going to have a good picture of that. So even though they're strippers and not necessarily doing online stuff, there were rumbles at a couple of years ago when the clubs closed because of the pandemic. A lot of them went online to do camming and OnlyFans, and there was some talk about, or hopeful or wishful talk about potentially creating a collective, a co-op that would supplant those messed up OnlyFans models where they're just ripping off the workers. It's just a new way of ripping off the workers or performers. And there's a porn one as well. I can't remember the name of it, but so yeah, I guess moving to a collective model where you can fight back collectively against that ever-present, I call it the man who wants to just cash in on sex workers, and because the people on OnlyFans are not the ones making money. It's OnlyFans, it's the company. So I would connect with the strippers in LA. And that's, just because, as I'm sure in the industry, even though there are strippers who've organized, a ton of them, I think, are in other sectors of the industry and will have knowledge of that and possibly just be able to connect you or, kind of work with you they're not going to be able to hold your hand and give you a step-by-step and make it happen, right? But you need other people, you need others with the shared collective interest if you're going to organize. So I would say try to connect with them, try to connect with other people that who are working in the industry. Can I ask, when you talk about online, are you talking about doing like OnlyFans type of camming, or are you talking about doing
any form of online work
where the work itself is online, or you're just advertising
any form of online service?
Yeah. I think that the biggest threat there is really that this tech sector is just going to suck up all your money, or suck up and just make all these unfair rules, so that you don't get paid what you should. So I really would love to see the online work move towards collectivization and worker ownership.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you for answering my question.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to get in touch with anyone down in LA, you can. I'm happy to. Here, let me put my email. Is it okay, Alex? Is it okay if I put my email in here? Or Alex, can you just pass her my email, whoever that was?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Excellent. While we're on the topic, I guess maybe thinking about, presently, but also when you were organizing, are there aspects of this line of work that make organizing sort of uniquely difficult?
Yeah, there was for us, there was a nervousness about, well, first of all, there was a sense of like, hey, I'm just doing this temporarily. I don't want to get involved, and so there's a hesitation to really identify with the work and to invest in it in that way. That's similar to, honestly, I run into that with adjunct professors and part-time faculty who are like, I'm just part-time, I don't want to, and I would be like, no, it's most important for you to be in our union, to be a member, because you're the ones who are getting the most exploited. So, but there was that sense of like, okay, I'm not really here to make a union. I'm here to like get some money so I can finish school. Right. There was also a kind of shame factor or fear element about, hey, if you guys sign up, that our boss perpetuated, hey, if you vote yes and you join SEIU, then they're going to have your contact information and you're going to get harassed and all this stuff. So there was a fear about that kind of sexual harassment, I think, or just privacy that really wouldn't be an issue in most other industries. It also wasn't true. It was just a fear that the boss tried to scare us with. And I mean, it is also, the sex industry is an industry where there's a lot of moving around. It's not particularly stable necessarily. It's not like you have the same coworkers for years and years, like maybe at another job. So that can create a tenuousness. That made it a little bit harder. It also, I mean, there was a vulnerability though, where, like you're dancing naked next to these people for, many hours of each week. And that did create a sense of camaraderie and solidarity, I think, this vulnerability that we kind of had innately in the job.
I'm reminded of that early in the book, I think right after you're hired, there's a scene where you kind of go back to the same, weekly that you originally saw the job advertisement in. And I think you mentioned like, oh, like I'm surprised they're still advertising. Like they hired somebody. And it kind of occurs to you like, oh, they're always hiring new people because people are always leaving. And that kind of like, that sort of like cyclical hiring process. It reminds me of we had some folks on to talk about Amazon and fulfillment centers last year or 2 years ago. It's hard to remember at this point, but like the way that those jobs are designed to sort of not keep, right? I mean, they're designed to have people come in and work for 6 months or work for a year, and then to quit because they're exhausted. They've pulled a muscle in their leg and they can't do it anymore. And that's sort of a managerial technique to prevent people from coming together in solidarity, right? If your coworkers are constantly changing, it's very confusing.
Yeah, exactly. I talk about that. How I really thought like, oh, I did an audition and that means I'm hired. Like, I really thought it was a rare thing. Like, oh, I'm doing the audition because they need to have someone, in this position. No, it's like a constantly rotating, constantly rotating workforce.
That advertisement has a permanent place in the help wanted section.
Yes, exactly.
So we've got another question from an attendee who I was just back channeling with. Are you there, Raul?
Yes, sorry. Yeah. Hi, Jenny. I had 3 different questions, and I think for the most part, you've kind of been able to answer all of them already. But so I'll try to pick just the best one. My first question was about trying to analyze the union and be like, well, how do I know that this was successful? And so kind of like the civil rights movements, and then years later we have protection, racial protection. Do you feel like 2 years ago the NLRB federally recognized strippers as employees now? Yeah. And then you just mentioned about the new LA club unionizing as well. So would you consider those 2 things as a sign of success that came from the LL's unionization?
Well, I think that both of those 2 things are positives, and I think that they, yes, are. I'd consider them successes. I wouldn't say that they came from the Lusty Lady. Like clearly the folks who organized down in LA, they did their own work. Like, yes, we were there, and they knew about us, and they were in touch with us. But that was those dancers on their own power, doing the organizing work. And we were all, those of us who connected and consulted with them were happy to be a resource. But for sure, that was that was all them. And I'm just happy that they kind of looked to us and made use of us to the extent that we were able to. The legal the recognition of dancers as employees, I don't think is related to the Lusty Lady. Except in the widest sense of there being a sex worker organizing movement. But because the Lusty Lady was a rare club that already recognized us as employees, we were employees who earned an hourly wage and punched a time clock. That was very rare in that industry. So we weren't subject to the same independent contractor logic and exploitation that gave rise to that shift to recognizing dancers as employees. But the fact that we were employees was what allowed us to go through the organizing process. It would have been much more chaotic and difficult without that. And I think it's also what it has allowed the Star Garden dancers, thank you to who recalled the name, to the Star Garden dancers in LA. It's what allowed them to move forward with their organizing effort.
Yeah, I did catch that at the very beginning when you mentioned that. And I was like, oh, it seemed like there was already kind of a platform that you could build on going into the unionization that kind of made it a little bit easier compared to.
Yeah.
That's cool. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, when we organized at the Lusty, we were frequently in the media, we were always referred to as the first strippers union in the world, or the first, unionized exotic dancers. And we found out that we weren't. It was just that it's a forgotten history. Gypsy Rose Lee, Gypsy Rose Lee was a stripper, a burlesque dancer in the 40s and 30s, I think, and the 40s. And she was a union steward in her. So they were unionized way, way, way back then. So it's not a new thing, but there is, I think, an erasure of the movement.
Nice. And I think the book does a great job of kind of contextualizing, you know, your labor moment within this larger history. And I think, I mean, you admit yourself that, you know, you didn't know about sort of the history of organizing until you actually started doing the organizing yourself.
That's it's something I had to learn through the process. And I definitely talk about those I can't remember who was saying she's really academically interested in the industry. Was it Emmy? I can't remember. But that would be, I think maybe it's Trashy Femme. That I write a lot about the history stuff in the book. So if you want to read about some of the really cool history, including the prostitute strike in Paris, which is or not Paris, in France somewhere. Anyway.
Well, I promised I was going to ask you about it before we let everybody in on the call, but I am curious. You know, you got into this industry while pursuing a PhD, which would allow you to work in another industry. You've become a professor. You're now, you know, president of your university's chapter of AFT.
I was, but now, but my term is over. So yes, I need to update my bio. Yeah.
I'm just curious, and I mean, you've mentioned kind of the plight of you know, adjunct faculty. I'm just curious about kind of placing these two industries side by side. And I think, you know, the average person on the street would look at them as apples and oranges, but I'm curious to know, as somebody who's worked and organized in both industries, can you tell us a little bit about that Venn diagram and maybe what the middle area looks like?
Yeah. Oh, wow. Well, they are very different, but I think that the academic world is maybe not as cognizant as we should be that, like, basically there's an app for everything now, and they're going to try to, you know, they being capitalism, the man again, they're going to make every job precarious and every job independent contractor or whatever they can do to get rid of our rights. And, you know, academics are not immune to that. They're coming for us. And so I think it's really important for us in the academy to see that, like, we're not safe from that, and the only real safety is our solidarity with each other, and our ability to fight back collectively against that. And I guess, yeah, to me, that was always apparent. And we never felt like, at the Lusty Lady, we never felt like, oh, well, we're safe, you know, from backlash. We thought when I was organizing, I heard, oh, there were dancers in Arizona who tried to organize at a mafia club, and one of the girls got shot in the head in the parking lot. Like, you know, we never felt safe. We always just felt like, oh, I'm going to get blacklisted from all the clubs in town. I won't be able to work. So we always knew that our work was precarious and that we only had each other. And I think that academics, I think we're starting to realize that, particularly adjunct and deliberately precarious, deliberately on the part of management, precarious faculty are realizing that. So yeah, so that there's a real commonality there.
Well, I hope so. I think they're both industries too, where people don't, you know, people don't historically think of these industries as sort of needing unions or those being kind of union jobs. And, you know, as the kind of the precarity just continues to rise. Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that people start to sort of realize that, you know, we need to be able to rely on each other. This actually, and I want to be mindful. I don't know that everybody knows, but Jenny is zooming in from the East Coast where it is now 10:30. So I kind of had one question that maybe we could wrap with, unless somebody else desperately has another question. I'm reminded of another scene from the book where you first go to meet with a rep from the SEIU. And there's this scene where you're kind of explaining the situation, and I think you say something like, we're trying to figure out if we need a union, and the union rep basically says, you've already got one, just by virtue of the fact that you're kind of here, there's more than one of you. This is before perk cards and dealing with the NLRB. But I'm kind of wondering about just kind of like what you learned about the process of unionization, sort of independent of the more sort of formal structural hoops you had to jump through. What were the benefits of kind of coming together with your colleagues?
Yeah, that's such a great question. It's something that I think I really carried with me because I really cut my organizing teeth at the Lusty Lady. I really carried the knowledge with me that all your union is you and each other, like you and your coworkers. There is not a big daddy, that you join and is going to protect you. What protects you is the power that you build with each other. And that has been learning not to externalize like the union as a separate institution, has been really helpful to me later in my later organizing work. And it's also, it's really it's scary. It was scary. Like, I think we wanted some, can the law come and fix this for us? Or can the union, the outside union fix it? No, like you want that to happen, but it really was a revelation that, okay, that the power just comes from us. And that's something I think that I've carried with me and into my work in academic, in an academic union at AFT 2121, like realizing, like people would ask, oh, can we go on strike about this thing? And or can we just make a complaint and then it's, the law will fix it? Like, is it illegal what they're doing? And I would always just had to remind myself and others, like, if we have enough power and unity and solidarity with each other, that's what matters. Like, if we have enough power, that's what's going to get us this injustice corrected. It's not because it's illegal or, a lawyer is going to do it for us.
Excellent. Well, I mean, I can't think of a presentation that gets more to the theme of the seminar, labor striking back. So just thank you so much. I mean, thank you for your work and, the work, but also coming in and sharing that work with us. I think it's, just obviously I'm clearly a fan. I think we've inspired some people to go out and check out the book. But it's just a really emotionally honest book about the challenges of that. Exactly what we were saying, the fact that the union is you, right? That's a powerful thing that needs to be acknowledged and respected, and it's a major responsibility. So I think I see in the comments, in the union we're strong and we are the union, but that because we are the union, that accountability and solidarity is it can be a burden sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thanks again. This was absolutely fantastic. I'll be following up via email with some next steps. But how about one last round of applause for our guest tonight? Absolutely, just great work. And
thanks, everyone. Thank you so much, Alex, for inviting me, and thanks everyone for your great questions. And thanks, Emmy, who's I've been looking in the chat at the amazing organizing that you're doing. I love it. Voter registration on the stroll. Fantastic. So yeah, thanks everyone for coming and for your great questions. And if you need to get in touch with me about future organizing any of that, Alex has my contact info. All right.
Sounds good. All right. Well, thank you so much. No seminar next week. We've got a holiday, and then we come back the following week. We're actually screening The Big Scary S Word, which is a new documentary by Yale Bridge, which is absolutely fantastic. We're going to watch it, and then Yale's going to zoom in and kind of tell us why we shouldn't be so afraid of the big scary S word. So excellent. All right. Well, everybody have a fantastic evening, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.